Greetings. I haven't made a video in a while, though I've been meaning to. It's rare these days for me to have quiet time to myself without anyone else around, when I can just speak out loud without disturbing anyone else around me in my vicinity. Anyway, recently I was talking with my friend Mike. He has his own channel and he sees a lot of interesting stuff. I'm not sure what we were talking about at the time, but he asked me the question, where do you think our thoughts come from? For me, that's a very good question, and I'm sure some of you have wondered that as well. I don't have any solid answer, but of course I love to speculate and wonder. Lately I've been noticing a large amount of synchronicity in the general population. Not so much synchronicity for me, but more so for everyone else. It's almost as if the amount of unique thoughts worldwide has diminished in some way, almost like everyone is having the same kind of thoughts. One example is that a friend of mine the other day was thinking about making pancakes. Planned it days in advance. On the day, made pancakes as planned. However, after she made the pancakes, took some photos and ate them, within a few hours she noticed on her Facebook that 3 or 4 of her friends had also made pancakes on the same day. And those friends, they didn't know each other. They'd all independently had the same thought on the same day, and they'd all made pancakes on that day. So did my friend have the original thought, and then somehow her friends read her mind or picked up on her wavelength in some way, and they also had the same idea? Or did the thought come from elsewhere, outside of this reality, and us somehow, each of us equal receivers of the same thought? And because each of them had a lot of time on their hands, turning that idea into reality, actually making the pancakes, actually making that thought come to life, was very easy for them. So they all did it. And they all happened to have that thought on the same day, and so they all did the same thing on the same day. That's just one example, but my friend has noticed a whole bunch of synchronicities like this recently. She also thought about making scones, and then noticed other people also talking about making scones. On the television later, she saw someone else talking about making scones on TV. And then I myself just opened up Facebook earlier this morning when I was looking to research something, and the very first thing that popped up on my Facebook feed was a video about how to make the perfect scones. And it was like right after I'd started typing in what I wanted to say in this video. So it's like, a continuation of the same theme. And it was the very first thing that popped up. So where do our thoughts really come from? Another example, I watched a video yesterday about the different categories of people in lockdown, in quarantine, how they act, what they do, how they think. And it was meant to be one of these funny sort of videos. And it was mildly amusing for me, but just like in a very simplistic manner, like it didn't really interest me all that much, but I watched it anyway. And you had the one person who spends their time cooking. That's what they do when they're in lockdown. You've got another person who's the conspiracy theorists. You've got the person who says it'll all blow over and everything will be fine. Then you've got the person who's starting wine o'clock early every day. So they're, they're really getting into their booze, their beers or their alcohol, their wine. And you've got, the person doing all sorts of different things. You've got the person living in fear and not taking any chances. You've got the person who hasn't had to change one bit. They're still doing things exactly the same because they were always housebound anyway. Then you've got the person who misses sport, etc., etc., etc. There was like about 5 or 6 other things, different categories that I haven't mentioned. So that was just that little short comedy skit video. Obviously those categories are quite broad. However, I found that I could definitely relate to a lot of them. Like I felt like I could fit into most of those categories. And then I realized that most of humanity at the moment would also fit into one or more of those categories. And so I was like, wow, how on earth is it that we have billions of people on Earth, and yet together all of our experiences are so similar, at the moment at least. It's almost as if there's only like 9 brains on the planet. 9 different brains, and everybody's connected to one or more of those brains. And so whilst everyone seems to have different thoughts and different experiences, they're all just slightly different expressions of the same collective consciousness. Perhaps that's all it is. Perhaps we're all just part of one single collective consciousness, divided up into 9 different brains, all having their own different ideas and thoughts, and then subdivided amongst those brains into billions of people, all hooked into the same lines of thought or thinking. Or maybe that's how the controllers, if you are a believer in controllers of the world, maybe that's the way that they want us to be rigged up into a very limited set of ways of thinking. But perhaps all of our thoughts simply come from that collective consciousness in some way. I had some fascinating dreams this morning. One of them was very long, and I've since forgotten all of it. But as I woke up, I had this weak sort of sensation, or this vague sensation, that I was viewing the dreams as myself, as me. However, what I experienced in the dream was not what I'd normally associate with myself in this world. I can't remember the dream, so I'm going by how it felt, but it felt as if I was in the dream experiencing another side of myself, another aspect of myself, another persona of myself that I'm not familiar with in this day-to-day reality, and yet is somehow also me at the same time. So I then proceeded to have a second dream right after that, which I also can't remember, but I also had the feeling of it being me and yet not me within the dream. The second dream was quite interesting because when I woke up from it, I found myself laughing out loud. Not a lot, not a big laugh, not catching myself laughing, but it was more like a chuckle. But what came out of my mouth was more like a chuckle, but in my mind it was quite hilarious. And I have no idea what I was laughing at, but I just know that the whole dream was funny. Everything in that dream was just, it was like, I can't even remember it clearly, but I just know that the whole thing was funny. And the me within this world is completely not funny. I have a sense of humor, but I'm terrible at making jokes. Like every once in a blue moon I'll make a joke and then maybe someone will laugh, but it's extremely rare. Like I'm terrible at making jokes or being funny. I'm always a bit either too serious or playful, but I'm not, I'm just terrible at jokes. And yet in the dream, it was me making the jokes and yet me laughing at the jokes at the same time. So it was almost like I was laughing at myself. It was really confusing to think about it now. And so it doesn't really somehow make sense in this reality. And I think that's why I can't remember it, because it made perfect sense at the time, but within the context of what we know in our day-to-day waking life, it made no sense at all. And so that's why I can't relate to it and I can't remember it, because I can't think about it. I can only kind of like feel how it felt a little bit. So anyway, that dream, I sort of felt like, even though it definitely wasn't me, like it's definitely something that my brain is incapable of doing, making these funny jokes, and yet somehow it was me in my dreams making those jokes. It's like, this aspect of my consciousness that I either completely didn't know, or there's some other aspect of myself. Anyway, another thing that I've been noticing for the past few months is that not only is reality and the whole world somehow reflecting my thoughts and feelings, which some of you have noticed in the past as well, but I've also noticed it almost feels as if the whole world is getting closer to me in some way. Slowly, very slowly, but it feels like people are starting to like line up their thoughts with mine. It's starting to come into my realm of experiences. And there's a noisy car coming. So it's almost as if I am one of those 9 brains that I mentioned earlier, and many other people also share the same brain as me, but I myself am more towards like the middle of the brain, and it feels like people on the outside are like coming closer and closer. They're gravitating towards the middle, and they're synchronizing with me in some way. Not just like with my thoughts, but they're also like it feels like they're getting closer to me. I can't really recall any useful examples of this in the real world at the moment. But each time I've noticed it's been like really very subtle, very minor little things that are not really worthwhile remembering. That's why I can't remember them. But it's happened so many times that each time I was like, ooh, look at that, look at that, look at that, look at that. And I can just see it's like a reflection of what I thought like a few hours earlier or an hour earlier or the day before or a couple of days before. And I'll have this random idea, and then the next day Trump will say something, or like just random things, and then it just synchronizes perfectly with the same sort of topic I was thinking. But it feels like not only is it synchronicities, but it feels like those thoughts of other people getting closer to me. So that's happening amongst the general population. But at the same time, I also had the similar feeling of the similar idea within the Mandela Effect community. Everyone seems to experience different things at different times, and they all have their different effects. So everyone has their own sort of perception of what's changed and what hasn't. But it seems like, some people get affected a lot, some people less so, some people see very few Mandela effects. Everyone's different. I'm sort of more in the category of less so. There's a whole lot of things that I can agree with, but I don't sort of like run into Mandela effects every day. Normally someone will point something out and I'm like, oh yeah, I can agree with that. So the position of the heart for me is probably one of the biggest ones that I agree with. The position of Australia, I sort of like remember when I was younger, it was a lot lower down compared to Papua New Guinea, and it was much more in line with New Zealand. It wasn't, New Zealand wasn't as far south of Australia as it is now. It's almost like New Zealand stayed in the same position and Australia has shifted up. So I agree with some of those effects. But I did have this idea a while back, and I haven't let go of that idea or this feeling that it sometimes it feels like other people who experience the Mandela effect feels like they're getting closer to me in some way. So similar to what I was saying before, it kind of feels like when I was a lot younger, maybe when I was a teenager, for example, that's probably when a lot of things shifted for me, and I sort of noticed but didn't pay too much attention at the time. And since then, everything's kind of I've gotten used to the world how it is now. And so a lot of the big shifts for me would have happened when I was younger. And since then, I've just been doing minor shifts here and there to bring myself into the ideal reality for me. Whereas for a lot of other people, I feel like they're on timelines that are quite different to mine until recently. And then all of a sudden they started they started shifting, but they started shifting not quite randomly. It's almost like they started shifting towards me, towards my timeline. So again, I imagine myself as being somewhere near the center, near the middle, perhaps not in the middle, but close to it. And then you've got others who are far away, but they are gravitating their way towards the center. And as they do so, they get closer and closer to my experience and to my timeline. And as that happens, they notice many huge Mandela effects from their perspective, whereas from my perspective, a lot of those things haven't changed. There aren't so many effects for me. But these fascinating people who have a great energy and whom I feel a great connection to are making their way here towards the middle, towards where I am, coming into the same place where I am residing at exactly the right time when they need to be and when I need them. So those are my different thoughts today about what are thoughts, where do they come from? You know, am I the originator of some thoughts, and then do I transmit those thoughts for other people to receive and then act on? Or and some of you in the same category as well? Or are we each all just simply receivers of the thoughts? Our brains are just simply there to take all of those thoughts and ideas, process them, and just pick out the ones that seem relevant to us specifically. Much like a car radio, you've got all these lots of different bands of frequencies being blasted out to us, TV and radio and everything else, and then you've got the receivers, the radio device or the television set that will take the signal from the aerial, receive it, and then pick out a particular channel that is relevant to us and just play us back that channel. So it's almost like maybe the thoughts come from elsewhere, and then our brain just takes all of the different thoughts and it picks one channel that we want to listen to, and that's what we perceive. That's another idea. So I don't know, all different ideas, all different thoughts. Let me know your thoughts on what thoughts are and where thoughts come from, if you have any ideas.